Clinical trials are crucial for advancing medical treatments and discovering new modalities that can improve patient outcomes. But the process of recruiting participants for these trials can be challenging, which can lead to treatments and potential solutions not reaching the patients who need them most. How do we encourage more people to participate in clinical trials? And how can we overcome the traditional recruitment methods and reach an even larger pool of potential candidates? And what role does technology play in improving the clinical research and trial process? With me today on the show is Ben McEvoy from Evrima, who are on a mission to use technology to improve pathways to participation in clinical research and trials. In this episode, we talk about the challenges of recruiting participants for clinical trials, the role of technology in expanding recruitment reach, and strategies for engaging clinicians and patients in clinical trial opportunities. And a lot more too. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen. This is Talking HealthTech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare.
Yep.
G'day, Ben. How you going?
G'day, Pete. I'm very well. How are you?
Really good. It's good to have you on the Talking HealthTech podcast because it's been a while since we've connected with anyone from Evrima on the show. Back in episode 94, we had Charlotte on, and we can certainly reflect on what's happened since then, although there's been a fair bit of engagement in the THT Plus community as Evrima members, and also Charlotte's appeared on a few of our summit sessions as well. But it's great to have you on the pod today. Tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do at Evrima.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, it's been fantastic to be engaged with Charlotte. I've been working with her for a number of years. My background is in technology, so I used to be a nerd. My father was a doctor, and so I like to say that my experience in health tech began fixing Dad's PC back when I was a teenager. He was an early adopter of technology in his practice, but you always need a little bit help from your tech-savvy sons to make sure the printer's working and so on. Between then and now, I've been leading software development teams now for the last software development and technical teams for the last 20 years or so. I've been delivering a range of different systems, including health tech systems, into the UK market, North America, and obviously the Australian market. I spent some time leading the engineering team at Medical Director, for example, for a while. And that's actually how I got connected to Charlotte. So I was very active in the health tech scene in Sydney. And she was looking for somebody to help her with the technical side of her startup back in 2020. And we got connected that way. And I've been part of the Evrima story ever since.
Well, good knowledge of particularly the GP market, both from the experience with the practice management system, medical director. But it's funny you say your dad was the GP and you were the tech person, because back when I was a vendor, working with GP clinics, the most common tech person that we deal with at the clinic was usually the son or the daughter that was taking
that was me.
Yeah. So there you go. We maybe in another time we would have set up your practice management system. But so at Evrima, now for those that aren't fully familiar with what Evrima does in the space it operates in, give us the gist.
So Evrima, it's the ancient Greek word for discovery, so that's where the name comes from. And it was born out of Charlotte was involved in or became aware of clinical research and some time ago, and she kind of identified this niche in the market where there's a problem with clinical trials in particular. The number one problem with clinical research, this is just globally, is just finding people to participate in clinical trials. So if you look at all the surveys conducted, you go to any of these conferences, the number one issue is somewhere between 80 and 90% of all clinical research in the world is either delayed or cancelled because they just can't find enough people to participate in the research. Evrima was founded to address that problem and to try to look for innovative ways to apply technology to the issue of clinical trial recruitment. So we were talking just before we began recording about Marvel movies, for example. So one of the biggest challenges that we find is public perception, right? So I say sometimes it's Evrima against Captain America, right? Yeah. If you think about the way that clinical research is portrayed on screen, so I went back and had a look at Captain America, for example. And here's a guy who begins out a very weedy bloke, and he gets the magic serum injected into him, and he becomes a superhero, right? Fantastic outcome. But how is the process of that clinical research actually portrayed on screen? Well, inevitably somebody's strapped into a steel table on, in some horrible space. There's some evil people in the shadows off to the side with the white coats on, and they're injecting somebody with some green goop, and inevitably the person's screaming and writhing around in pain and agony, right? That's a very common.
Always at the last second wanted to get out of it too. It's like, oh no, wait, and then
almost always against their will, or if not against their will, at least they're enduring horrible pain and horrible trepidation, right? So there is a public perception issue, and Marvel perpetuates that. I think of Wolverine as well, being injected with steel and he's drowning and screaming. It's a pretty common portrayal. And so the public perception of participation in clinical research is probably pretty poor. If you go and ask somebody on the street, tell me what that feels like, or what it might be like. It feels like a very risky prospect. It feels like it might be painful or dangerous. Where there's nothing could be further from the truth in reality. I think of also The Simpsons, the three-headed fish and, all this kind of stuff as well. There's heaps of portrayals like that. So the reality is that we have to overcome that public perception issue. And I sometimes talk about donating blood, for example. So whatever reason, the idea of donating blood is very popular. People think of it as a selfless thing that they can do. They go to a clinic, they get a needle put in their arm. It's not particularly comfortable. It's not particularly fun. Some people faint or pass out or whatever, but they're willing to do it. Donating blood is a selfless thing that can be done to benefit the community. And that's not very dissimilar to what you might experience as being part of a clinical trial, right? In fact, often it doesn't involve any needles at all. It's, you're taking a compound or a new, just a tablet. So it's a lot less invasive. But for some reason, for this public perception issue of clinical research being something that's kind of dangerous. So we have some work to do there to change public perception. And we're working on that. And I guess the other part is just bringing the awareness of clinical research to the market, so to the general population, but also to clinicians. So you mentioned I have some experience in general practice and primary care. When you go and look at the research, somewhere between 0.2%, that's 0.2%, and other research shows always single figure digits of clinical trial participants are referred by a primary care physician, for example. So these are the people that you speak to first in your healthcare journey, but there's no connection between that point of care and potential participation in clinical research. So bringing the information about clinical trials to clinicians in a form that they can consume easily, that they're able to understand and communicate to their patients as a potential care option, that's a challenge as well. And then there is just the complexity of moving potential participants and candidates through what is a complex and sometimes difficult to understand eligibility process. Of just qualifying participants and getting them actually enrolled on a trial. And we think there's a place for technology in all of that. And that's what Evrima's been founded to do, is to solve those problems.
I think about that part a lot, actually, the fact that by the very nature, clinical trials need to have a robust process for selection and criteria and eliminating candidates, because as I understand, doing a clinical trial in a particular subset to be able to demonstrate in a particular use case, right? Rather than, just anyone can they're not being difficult for the sake of it. It's to provide evidence in the end for in an industry that is always evidence led. And so we need all this evidence that's usually come out of clinical trials and clinical research to then demonstrate the effectiveness of a particular treatment or modality or whatever it might be. But I think about that, and especially through some of the other podcast series we've been recording through Talking HealthTech, there's the MScan Spot On podcast, which is all around the skin cancer side. And a lot of the topics that we've talked about on that particular show have been around, encouraging the participation in clinical trials and how, and there's been so many great patient stories of how lucky and grateful they feel for finding and discovering. It almost feels like they've uncovered something that was really difficult to find, this clinical trial that given them access to something they wouldn't have otherwise been able to access in terms of treatment for themselves, let alone also servicing the greater thing. Am I kind of on the same page there?
Absolutely, 100%. So obviously there are a range of different trials that are being run at any given time, but the stories that keep us motivated at Evrima, and certainly for myself personally, as somebody who's worked in tech for a long time, and my mum often has asked me, what do you do for a living? I don't quite understand it, building technology solutions. It's kind of hard to explain to mum. But this one was really easy to explain to her. I said, we're using technology to improve the pathways to participation in clinical research and clinical trials, because we know that there are treatments out there that are viable that aren't getting to the shelves or aren't getting to patients or aren't getting to market because of this challenge. And Mum told me a story. She immediately had a story that she relayed to me. She said, we're from Tasmania, my family from Tasmania. And she said, we knew a doctor friend in Tasmania, and he had a particular form of a respiratory cancer, lung cancer. He was diagnosed with terminal condition, right? There's no cure for this condition. And in fact, so certain were they that his life insurance paid out. Right, so sometimes life insurance pay out a little in advance when it's a terminal condition, so you can have the last trip with the family and so on. And he did all of that. He went to Paris with his family. In the intervening time, he joined a clinical trial with a new treatment for his particular type of cancer, and he's still alive today.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
she relayed that story to me immediately. So there's a human part to this, and it's as you say, it really has a couple of pieces to it. One is, yes, advancing the knowledge of all of these different treatments, of all this. Every single item that you see in a pharmacy shelf has been through a clinical trial to make sure it's safe and effective, and the side effects are known, counter indicators are known before it gets anywhere near a shelf. But also the very direct personal impact it can have on people with conditions who are unresponsive to current treatments or for which there are no current treatments, and their personal journeys. And we see that pretty regularly. Had one the other day, a lady saying, I've had a particular type of pain for basically my entire life. I got on this trial and now I've got pain relief for the first time. And we have to be careful because she's unblinding the trial, but it's a fantastic story to hear. So yeah, there's a very personal element to this, and we know that tech alone doesn't solve this problem, right?
Yes,
it's human plus tech that's going to resolve this.
Yeah, and actually, building on that particular problem around, I guess, discoverability or recruitment of people onto trials. On one side, there's this element of education and awareness around what a clinical trial is, but you also need to find people too. Like there are people who are looking for clinical trials and can't come across them for whatever way. What are the typical ways you find that are effective in terms of discovering eligible people for these clinical trials? Yeah,
so we have a range of different pathways. So clinical trial recruitment traditionally has been a fairly Stone Age sort of art, particularly when you're relying on clinical trial sites. So individual sites or independent sites who are absolutely fantastic at conducting clinical research. That's what they're there for. That's why they've gone into the industry, is to deliver these clinical research projects, these clinical trials with the public. But the one part that they probably didn't sign up for, and if you speak to sites, they don't particularly like it either, is the recruitment side of things. And I have done a lot of hiring in my time, so I can feel their pain, and I empathize with them, because when you're looking for a new person to join your team, there is you have to cast quite a wide net, and then you do a lot of filtering through CVs and other signals to get down to a set of people that you then interview. And the whole way along, you're kind of disqualifying people, right, with the hope that you end up with a good candidate. But for every person you disqualify, that's a lot of time and effort that you put in, and there's literally zero outcome, right? You have absolutely no result at the end of all of that time and effort. And that's how sites think of it. And in some cases, they can go through tremendous amounts of just struggle to even identify these people. And even if they are identified as potential candidates, as you said earlier, there's a strict eligibility criteria. Often the patient themselves don't know, or the prospective participant themselves don't even know what those eligibility criteria are or don't understand them. You get candidates who say, yes, I have condition X, but no, they actually have condition Y, which sounds very similar to condition X, but isn't. So we had one site I was speaking to recently who said, we were running a trial and the sponsor provided us with 300 potential candidates immediately. And we thought, fantastic, brilliant. We're going to, enrollment's not going to be an issue. They didn't enroll a single person from that list of 300. There are fairly traditional ways of recruiting and everything from posters up behind toilet doors in hospitals. That absolutely happens. Advertisements in local papers, flyers handed out in shopping centres. There's a lot of this kind of localized recruitment that's being done. With new digital technology, now there's digital social media and there's a broader reach and ability to target that advertising to reach people who are likely to be candidates. That can be effective for some trials, particularly where the condition is well known or known to the public. So, for example, women's health, in some cases, there's good responses through that channel. Then other channels we are looking at and are engaged with are through primary care, for example. In some cases, you can reach specialists who have a particular interest in the therapeutic area that you're recruiting in as well. Pharmacy, other health tech partners as well. There's a lot of different, it has to be a multifaceted approach, we found. Just putting all of your eggs in the basket of digital marketing, it's not sufficient anymore. It used to be a very traditional approach, this kind of paper-based local recruitment. Now it's got to be broader, it's got to be digitized, and it's got to be multifaceted.
Do you find as well that there are particular champion clinicians who might be potentially specialists that would be strong advocates, probably connected to the research in some way or another, even just through professionally, become one of the biggest referral pathways? But that's great, but it's just also localized to whoever physically they might see and the clinical would know. But something more scalable, sure, like the social media side, that's one way. I'm quite interested also in the connecting with other technologies too, with other technology providers. Tell me a little bit more about what that thing looks like.
Yeah, sure. So let me touch just quickly on your comment there around referring clinicians in a specialist area. So yes, absolutely, that's a good channel, as you say, because they have an interest and they're likely to probably be across research in their area. But really, when you're looking for clinical trial participants, you're looking for two things. The first one is eligibility. So does the person have the required inclusion-exclusion matching? But the second is motivation. And when you go to referrals from clinicians specifically, you get a very good match on eligibility, right? So you can search EMR records, for example, and you can say, oh, yes, this person definitely has a condition that we're looking for. But you get zero signal on motivation, right? Absolutely none. So you end up with a list of people, and you then contact those people, and your conversion rate is kind of unknown. It can be quite high, it can be quite low. And so really the physician in the loop is the piece there that we focus on, is when a physician is involved in recommending a trial or bringing that trial information to the participant, the likelihood that they become motivated to actually consider it as an option increases to about 75-80%. They'll actually think about it. But like you say, it's quite localized, small practices with small patient numbers. So that's difficult to scale.
That motivation point's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Whereas on the flip side, social media, you get a very high motivation indicator because they've responded to the ad, they've clicked through, they've gone to a registration page, they've shared some information, so they're very motivated. Now,
they might not be eligible. Yeah,
exactly. So you're trying to solve both pieces of that puzzle. So in terms of partnerships with health tech organizations, so again, we're taking kind of an innovative view of this. There are a lot of health tech organizations that are interacting with the public and with patients. We've got to be careful about calling them patients because in some clinical trials, they're not patients, they're healthy volunteers, and that's not patients. But if I use the word patients, it's interchangeable. So participants, perhaps.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of health tech organizations that are interacting with prospective participants or candidates, and they will have different signals and different information on that eligibility and motivation driver, depending on what kind of interaction that they're having with those participants. So you just mentioned specialists. There'll be a bunch of information in EMR that give us very high eligibility signal, but a very low motivation signal. There are a lot of others that are interacting. So take even appointment booking providers, for example, right? When you're booking an appointment with your GP, some of those appointment providers ask you why you're booking this appointment, right?
Yep.
And so they will have some information from that patient about why they're going to visit their GP or the clinician that they're going to speak with. And with that signal, you could use that signal to then present a person with a link to a potential clinical trial that's relevant to the thing that they're booking for. And that's a moment in time where they're thinking about the future of their care. They're taking the next step in their health journey. And they may think, gee, a clinical trial, I'm going back to the GP for the 10th time trying to solve this problem. Maybe a clinical trial is right for me,
Well,
And so even booking providers could give you a signal that might say, if this person's gone back for the 10th time to solve this chronic condition, they might have a high motivation to seek an alternative treatment, and we know the condition to some degree, and so we can encourage them to participate at that level. And we're looking at a range of different technology partners for that purpose. So where can we get a signal that makes sense for us to potentially bring the option of clinical research to the participant at point of care or point of interaction with the health system?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about finding that fine balance between you've got this data and the information about a particular candidate, but with great data comes great. Let's keep the Marvel theme going, shall we? With great data comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, ensuring that trust and sovereignty of that data as well, and it's all done for the right reasons in terms of finding these candidates for these important trials. But yeah, it's an interesting one to solve and one that there's a lot of potential there. I think about the need in Australia, and that's one thing, but we've got 25 million people here in Australia, and there's a lot of other people in other parts of the world. Are you looking at these problems outside of our borders as well?
We're already in international markets, so we're in ANZ. We've had an office in Singapore as well. And we have looked at Southeast Asia, but also South Africa. So we have some links into South Africa as well. But the core place, obviously, for research is the USA. So, as you say, if you put Australia on the list of states in the United States, you made Australia the 51st state.
Oh, is that right?
I think we'd be the 9th largest state in America, right?
That's a good one.
I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but roughly it's something like 60% of clinical research is conducted in the US, 30% in Europe, and then 10% across the rest of the world combined. Yeah. It's absolutely a hub and a nexus for clinical research. Yeah. And we have been working with a lot of multinationals. Now, the reason they come to Australia is a couple of things. First, we have a pretty good health system. We have a very sort of tech-savvy population as well. We're a stable Western democracy. We're a great ally of the US as well. And so there's a lot of reasons why some research being conducted in Australia is a good idea. On top of which, the Australian government very kindly offers a 43% tax rebate for R&D conducted in Australia. So essentially, you can get your research done half price if you do it in Australia. And there's some caps on that mean that it tends to be most applicable to phase 1 and 2 clinical research. But there's a very robust tax rebate process in place that makes Australia a very attractive destination. Not to mention that our ethics committees, which are the equivalent of IRBs in the USA, essentially this is the group that oversees all clinical research and makes sure it's done according to good clinical practice and various other standards. And they ensure that the standards are appropriate then for the the FDA in the USA will accept research results conducted in Australia. They're very, the processes that they have in place are recognised as being very friendly to the conduct of research in Australia. So you get this regulatory structure that's very conducive to conducting research. You get these tax advantages. Australia is a good destination. And so you get all these multinationals come to Australia, and we work with a lot of them, and there's a lot of pain and hard work to get through the vendor qualification process and to pass various audits and to make sure you're adhering to certain standards. But then we end up with global agreements with these firms, and they then bring us into the US. So we have had some of those firms do exactly that. We love what you've done in Australia. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Great results. Please come and help us with a similar problem in the US, or we don't like our vendor in the US. Can you bring that solution to us in the US as well?
Think about the problems that you're solving now and how that's all evolved and grown since the last time we spoke on the podcast a couple of years ago to now. What's next? What are you kind of focusing on? Where your priorities at for the future for Evrima?
Sure. So as you say, it's been a great journey from when we started to where we are today. So our goal was really to look at Australia as kind of the proving ground for the solutions that we've been putting together. So one of the challenges is the fragmentation of our industry. Sure. And so we've built technology, and now we've deployed that technology to over 60% of commercial trial sites in Australia have been enrolled on our software platform. So when trials are being stood up in Australia, we can very, very quickly provide access for recruitment purposes to our tech, and that's that provides that ubiquity and pace, which is so important to those organisations. In terms of looking to the future, what that means is more of that. So more ubiquity. More ubiquity gets us better results in just a categorically different fashion than just incremental benefits of adding sites. Ubiquity has its own benefits. So more ubiquity, enrolling more sites, and listening to sites as well. We know that when we began, there weren't a lot of technologies in this space. Now there's quite a lot of technology being brought to sites, and you hear sites talk about tech overload, right? So I have to context switch, and there's a whole bunch of different techs that I've got to understand and know and get trained on every time there's a new trial. So we're really thinking about how do we build integrations, how do we homogenize that and take all that burden away from sites. So we're talking to a lot of tech partners about integration. How do we streamline that? How do we reduce the copy and paste admin burden on sites, which is a lot of what they cope with today?
Yeah.
The second thing that we're thinking about is how do we build those relationships with the tech partners that I talked about earlier? So looking for those novel channels to participants where we think that we can get a good, strong signal that they're likely to be eligible and they're likely to be motivated, and bringing those to the research organisations who are looking for those people. So building all of those novel channels that haven't been explored and haven't been exploited yet. The third piece is we're looking at how do we help overcome some of the practical challenges of clinical research as well. So technology, I think, as I said, only gets you so far. At some point, the person has to travel to a bricks and mortar site, to undergo participation. Can we use technology to overcome that? COVID's brought in the world of telehealth. We finally managed to get the regulators to agree that was something in 2023 that could be considered. What an excellent step it was. And can that same idea be applied to clinical research? Are there elements of the clinical trial process that can be done virtually or can be done remotely or can be done in a mobile fashion, so actually taking the trial to people's homes? That was the other thing that COVID introduced to us, was this expectation that everything would come to our home, right? So we're looking at that, and we have some operational and technology pieces that support that approach. And the last thing is going to the US. So that's our other big step, we have a beachhead there now, expanding that beachhead and growing the market into the US.
I mean, that's an all-encompassing plan that'll keep you plenty to cover between now and when we next check in on the show. But I did want to highlight, because we spent a good chunk of time talking about that recruitment stage for trials, but as you pointed out in that last element too, that's one step in the challenge, and it's the actual then the trial design and delivery and all the other kind of bits in between to get that could be improved to ultimately improve the rate of the research comes through and improve patient outcomes. So all the right reasons.
You're right that there's a whole bunch of other elements around recruitment. Like, in fact, if we can get good visibility into just understanding why people during that recruitment process, as a good example, are just being disqualified or are not agreeing to continue with their candidacy, you can actually make adjustments then to the trial design to capture a larger cohort to make it more likely you're going to be successful. And so that feedback loop is important, and we've seen that happen where we're able to provide live data on, hey, you're actually excluding a lot of people based on this criteria. Is there any change that you could make to those trial outcomes that you're trying to drive that would potentially allow those people to be included, or you could stand up another arm of the trial? And those changes can be made when you have that information to hand, which is something that previously was very difficult to get. And then retention is the other big piece. There's a big concern about patients who say, yes, I'd love to be involved. And there's a lot of time and effort that goes into consenting them and bringing them into the trial. And then they decide for whatever reason, at some point, and which completely they're entitled to do. They absolutely can withdraw at any time. But could we be doing better with engaging them and providing them with support, or providing them with information, or giving them visibility of what's coming next? So that they maintain that motivation throughout the course of the trial. And again, there's a place for technology to play in that, connecting people to others who are in trials, for example, so you have a kind of a community of support. We think that there's a place for that as well. Yeah,
just keeping that communication up and the expectation setting and the alignment, and that's where half of it falls down, right? So so much opportunity for technology to play a role. Look, Ben, I'll put the details for Evrima in the show notes of this episode. You've got the presence on the Talking HealthTech website. For someone that's listening to the podcast that might be interested in either learning more around the clinical trial side or just generally wanting to get a bit more immersed in the space, where could they go?
Pete, obviously you can come to our website, evrima.com.au. We're interested in hearing from those tech partners who are in the space and interacting with patients and could potentially provide a channel for people to become aware of and be educated in clinical trials as a potential care option, or just an interest to participate in general. So tech partners that are interacting with patients. And obviously, if you're a person yourself who has a condition that you're looking for a new treatment for, or you're just interested in participating in clinical research, you can come to the Evrima website. You can sign up. We have a range of different trials, and we will communicate with you. Our lovely team will reach out to you and call you and speak to you and see what you're interested in doing. So, we'd love to speak to anybody who has an interest of that kind.
We'll have to check in again on the podcast soon to see how things have progressed. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Been excellent to talk to you. Cheers.
For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.